Alrighty, so we are back uh, for Procurement 2.0. As most of you are probably aware, in 2024, Office of Management and Budget, OMB, they did some changes to 2 CFR 200, which is known as the Super Circular and is now known as 2024 revisions to 2 CFR 200. So they call them the 2024 revisions, but we're going to do rapid fire 60 minutes. We're going to get into this, probably less than that, and get into questions. But having said that, and we're going to do a poll just to see who's in the room. Okay. So we got to say it. Sorry. Webinar is designed to help provide information, right? I'm not an attorney. I'm not playing an attorney. So it relies mostly on published EPA resources, procurement guides, webinars. I encourage everyone to please, please, please take advantage of all the information that EPA has on their websites, as well as other resources that talk about the updates. At the very end of this webinar, there is a link to the actual, all of the updates to 2 CFR 200. Remember, 2 CFR 200 is the Uniform Grant Guidelines, okay? Not just procurement. But today's webinar is just on the procurement updates, okay? So if there are specific, very specific procurement questions, please, please, please work with your regional EPA project officer, okay? And of course, I'm going to take a line from Kelsey, EPA's counsel. This information is only as current as of today. So after this webinar, you're on your own. These things are fluid, right? So they change often. So keep up with your rain announcements. We'll get into those later. All right. Okay. So who's in the room here? Okay. So the first question was, what best describes your organization? So most of you are local government. Great. And nonprofits, 15. That's fabulous. We're seeing an uptick in nonprofits, and private firms, 15%. That's good, right? This is a partnership, guys. Firms also need to know what good solicitations look like, and the procurement rules too. Okay. Yes, that's great. 22%. No. Okay, I'm going to get into that. All right. As far as the first procurement trainings, because this webinar builds off of those trainings. Okay. So having said that, I'm not sure. At least I love the honesty in this room. Okay. So you engage developing, most of you are developing and evaluations. Great. Oversight, responding to bids. Sure, that tracks. Okay, great. All right. Thank you for that that information. It really helps me to tailor this webinar. And I'm going to stop that. Close out of that. So let's, as these puffins are going to do. I know, nobody woke up and said, you know what, maybe I should update our procurement policies and procedures. But that's exactly what you need to do, okay? So we have some proactive tips throughout the webinar, but at some point in time, you got to jump in, and I would highly, highly recommend starting with the 2-part proactive procurement series. They're in the chat box. They're on the CCLR website. They're on YouTube. They provide the basics, and then they'll provide the contracting, evaluation, selection, how to work in partnership with your solicited contractors, right? Okay. So why are we doing this? I'm all about the why, right? You know, procurement matters because you need services, goods, equipment, whatever. So you're going to have to do it. And if you do it, you need to make sure you're doing it right, especially with federal funds. If it's private funding, You do you, boo, right? Okay. But federal money, you have to follow the rules. So, as I said, rules are fluid right now. And these are called the 2024 revisions to 2 CFR 200. Again, that is the Uniform Grant Guidelines. Ugh, right? Very appropriate. Um, they guide federal grants, not just EPA, but all federal awarded grants, DOT, EDA, right? All that stuff, HUD. Anybody who's worked with HUD funds knows 2 CFR 200 really well. Okay. So these happened since January 2024. They became in effect a couple of months after, and then EPA updated their documents September 2025. Okay. These two documents should be very familiar to you. If you are not, let me introduce you to it. On the left is the EPA's best practices to procuring services and supplies, right? This is a 27, 28 page single-sided document. It is not that difficult to read. In fact, it's a very good document, okay? It's been updated and its companion piece, right, is the one on the right. This is not new. Everybody's like, oh, look, it's new CFR. No, this is just a companion piece because the competitive procurement process kept having a lot of mistakes and lots of non-compliant issues. And so they produced this lovely companion piece specifically about the method of contracting, one of the five, which is competitively procuring. Again, this is front and back, 4 pages, not 2 pages. So if you open up this document, right, not this one, but the old one, and it's 2 pages, you know you're in the wrong one. The new one is 4 pages. Okay, so let's get into this first. The effective dates. When did this all happen and how does it apply? First of all, the effective dates of these revisions awarded on or after October 1st of 2024. And you're like, okay, cool. Why am I even here? I have a 2023, brownfield grant. Stay tuned. Do not, do not leave. Okay. So existing cooperative agreements, right? CAs with funding added on or after October 1st, 2024. So all you RLFers out there or anybody who's had a grant that has had supplemental funding, right, on or after October 1st, 2024. Now, RAIN, which I've previously mentioned, by now, hopefully, if I could do a poll right now, you guys would all know what RAIN means, but I will give you the acronym. Recipient, Applicant, Information, Notice. RAIN announcements are very important because they essentially tell you about a change that has happened in a term and condition that applies to cooperative agreements or grants, right? These are very important. This is not like, oh, it's an acres update, even though those are important, okay? These are essential, okay? I love my acres updates, by the way. No shade on the acres updates, but RAIN announcements are very, very important, okay? And they can go back and be revised. So this one, as you can see, is 2025 GO1. This talks about specifically the 2024-2 revisions, okay? If you hyperlink to this, you'll get all this. I'm not even going to paraphrase. This comes directly from that, okay? So who else? Recipients. I'm not going to read this, okay? But made prior to October 1st, 2024. Here's the bottom line. If you think or if you want these revisions applying to you, talk to your EPA Brownfields officer. Say, hey, could these apply to me? Would they apply to me? Yada, 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 right? Have a conversation. All right. If you're expecting supplemental funding, right? When the new funding is issued, it'll be added and the revisions will be incorporated. Okay. Biggest thing to note is this: threshold increases. Remember the 5 methods of contracting and they have 5 different thresholds, right? Which we will be getting into. They only apply to grants awarded on or after October 1st, 2025. Okay, I can't say that enough. Okay, so remember that there are 2 different dates here. October 1st, 2024 is about the effective dates of the overall 2024 revisions. But as far as the threshold increases, right, that is only October 1st, 2025. Okay, so we'll talk about this. These are the major updates. Number one, we're going to be doing several updates, maybe 6 of them, as they apply to procurement. Thresholds have moved. Woohoo, right? How many of you were doing competitive procurement RFPs, right? On maybe you were only going out for, say, I don't know, 275, and you have an FY 2025 grant, right? The simplified acquisition threshold moved to 350. So you could have done a small purchase acquisition, or better yet, bid process, right? However, remember, procurement is a 3-legged stool. You have federal, you have state, you have internal and local, right? You have your own. So many local governments have policies in place that say, we don't care what the amount is. You are always going to go out for a bid, period. We don't care what the amount is, all right? I've had that when I've worked in the public sector, and it kind of makes everything a little easier, right? Because uh it's always going out to bid, right? Okay. So, not to overlook micro purchases, please, 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 when you think about doing a micro purchase, please talk to your project officer. There are a lot of fine print details that people overlook with the micro purchase. And this is about equipment, purchasing equipment. But if you do a micro purchase contract, make sure the recipient organization meets all the requirements under micro purchase into CFR 200. Going down to equipment supply, this is again, I think many of you already know this. It went from 5 to 10. The micro purchase in lieu of subaward also moved to 50,000. So even though these have moved, it's good just to know that the effective date, once again, I'm going to say this over and over again, these are only effective for awards that are awarded on or after 10/1/2025. Okay, so I was having a conversation with a grantee, and we were talking, and I was like, "Oh, wait, how much how much you procuring for?" And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 you got your grant, so this doesn't apply to you, right?" So I constantly have to remember that date. So, practice tip: update your internal policies. But you say, Joelle, our grant was awarded in 2023. We don't really need to. Yes, you do. And I'll tell you why. Because under 2 CFR 200, when you're using federal awards, you must have, there are 5 basic things which are covered in the first day 1 procurement training. There are certain things you must document in your organization's files, right? So your internal policies and procedures on procurement. Right now, 2 CFR 200, right? You've had revisions. You need to make sure that if you were relying on any of that, that these have been updated, that it has been noted. It's kind of like when I review an RFP that somebody has sent me, and I start seeing OMB circulars A-121, and I'm like, nope, those don't exist anymore, right? For folks who remember those were those 7 circulars that OMB published that guided grants, right? And other cost principles and stuff. That's why you have 2 CFR 200 because it's a super circular. It took all those circulars and put them all together in one place back in 2011, 2012, right? So remember, you still have to update your internal policies and procedures to reflect current regulations, okay? Let's talk about tribal nations. Okay, so tribal nations have the same status as states. I know I've talked to a lot of tribes out there about this when 2024 happened, when these revisions happened, that they could use their own procurement policies and procedures. They needed to basically write to EPA and say, hey, we would like to include this in our cooperative agreement, yada, 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 right? Now it is in 2 CFR 200.317. That's where it lives. However, this is a very big thing. You can rely on them, but they have to be in place at the time of the award. Like they have to exist, okay? So they can't be retroactive, right? So if they weren't there, then you're subject to 2 CFR 200. All right. So they have to be in place. So it behooves you that if you wrote a grant and that waiting period, right? Remember back from the Now What webinar about 2 weeks ago? If you missed that, please check that out. Now's the time to be looking at your procurement policies and procedures. And if they're not there, or if they're not up to snuff, get that squared away so that when you, keeping your fingers crossed, are awarded, well then, boom, this is, you're ready to go. You're ready to hit the ground running and your policies and procedures are in place, right? Because if they're not, and you come to me for help with your RFP, and I say, hey, what does your internal policies and procedures say about, X, Y, and Z? And you're like, I can't find those. I can't put earmuffs on and say, what? You really need to get those in place. That is a requirement under 2 CFR 200. You must have written policies and procedures for all 5 methods of contracting. That's just one thing, but we're not going to get into that now. Go check out that video. Okay. Update number 3. I can't understand this one. I still don't understand this one, but old rule, you couldn't do geographic preference. Okay. New rule, they just removed it. They just removed the prohibition. So, does this mean you can say in your RFP, bidders should be within 25 miles of the site? Okay. Why would this not be allowed? Right? This wouldn't be allowed if you know that there's only 1 or 2 firms that fit in that, that can fit in that little scenario, right? So we call that restrictive language. So ultimately, even though there are updates, you always need to make sure that there's free and open competition, right? As well as DBE. So let's get into that too. So remember, always make sure there's no restrictive language, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, so here's the other thing. If you add geographic preference, right, you're just going to slip it in your RFP, you need to be making sure that you document how it is applied consistently over all of your federal grants, as far as if you were to go over how you do this consistently in your organization when you're procuring. All right. So it can't just be like a one-off. All right. Number 4, this is the one that confuses people the most. Okay, look, DBE did not go away. It just some of the provisions got suspended, like the reporting, right? Okay. Kathy, you're funny. Any advice on executive order and DEI? That's a whole other webinar, right? What specifically about that? Put your question there and if we have time, we may be able to get to that. If not, that's a peer group discussion. Um, but I appreciate the question. So DBE. Okay. So some of you might have grants that in your work plan it says DBE reporting. Sure, annual. Nobody says you don't not have to do it, right? But nobody's going to be collecting it, if you will. But if you want to keep track of that, sure, why not, right? But EPA is not requiring this. It's not a requirement. It's not a programmatic, administrative requirement. So that got suspended in executive order in January of 2025. Therefore, any of DB reports in 2025 would not be necessary. However, when it applies to procurement, you still need to mention DBE in the RFP, as well as talking about, making sure people and yourselves are doing good faith efforts for minority business enterprises to be, a simple sentence of like, we encourage minority and women business owned businesses to apply, right? EPA has some other recommendations like the Small Business Administration, other places where small businesses might, look for bids or where you can, seek them out. So, please check updates on DBE before every procurement. All right. So don't scrap your DBE outreach. It didn't go away. I promise you. It's 40 CFR 33 is still there. Okay. And you need to document your good faith efforts. I did put those in later, so we'll go over those just as a recap. Okay. Number 5. This is a funny one. This was a loophole that has been closed. All right. So the loophole before was it just said recipients. Okay. So updates now say recipients and subrecipients. So subrecipients, when you do any subawards, subrecipients, they are now explicitly included in 2 CFR 200 now. There you go. Okay. So it's basically an exclamation point on procurement standards are flowing downwards, right? So even though you might have that in the subaward, it has now been, made official, if you will. I mean, it was always there, but the documentation was, well, with everything on these updates, even though there's like it's kind of like driving a manual car, right? The gas and the clutch. Okay. So the updates have taken a little bit of gas off, right? Not so much like there's more streamlining and the acronyms, some of them are gone. And instead of saying the non-federal entity, we're just saying recipient now, right? A lot of things are trying to speak in plain English. But where you've taken things off, they're putting things on. And what that means is there's going to be more of a responsibility for grant recipients to document their files. So a lot more documentation, justifications. So if anything, if you take anything away from this webinar, it's document, 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 like everything. All right. It is up to you to make sure that every step of the procurement process is being followed, amongst other things too. What if your subrecipient is a tribe with their own policies and procedures in place? Would they? Okay, we'll get to that question at the end. And if we can't, we'll get in touch. So, just remember your pass-through responsibilities to your subrecipients, and the monitoring got a little bit more explicit, okay? Especially the financial monitoring. So review your subaward agreements and monitoring plans and make sure that they understand that this is now explicitly covered. All right. All right, so those were the major updates as they apply to procurement. So we're going to go over some reminders and some considerations as they apply to solicitations, okay? So I kind of tapped on this one, but restricting competition. Just don't. Okay. The word brownfields in your RFPs should only be stated in one thing, and that is we are the recipient, or we have been awarded a FY25, whatever year it is, brownfields EP, EPA brownfields grant. That's it. Stop right there. Or we have brownfields in our community. That's great. Stop. Hard stop right there. Do not say in any of your criteria, your selection, anything, must have experience with brownfields, must have experience with brownfields grants, must have experience with EPA, right? That's restrictive language. It's restricting competition. I could be an amazing QEP, and I just came into your area and I haven't worked with EPA, but I know I've worked with contaminated properties. I have done cleanup plans, all this stuff, right? But by saying you have to have experience with EPA and brownfield grants and the particular state agency, that can be viewed as or could be viewed as restrictive language. Okay. So these are the following things. Just don't. Sample language. I've talked about this over and over and over again. So accepting any assistance from a contractor if it plans to compete, discouraging other bidders by naming firms. Just don't. You don't have to. Just say, an APCA was performed in such and such a time frame, and the following, and it's attached, right? If you want to provide the APCA. Issuing non-competitive awards to firms on retaining contracts, no. Okay. So unreasonable requirements, I talked a little bit about the geographic stuff. Sometimes I get the question about insurance. That's an internal question with your own organizations and stuff, as far as the insurance limits, as far as CGL, comprehensive general liability insurance, errors and omissions. There are standard, practices in the industry as far as how much. Most of your organizations should have this in your policies and procedures about what insurance requirements are expected. Okay. So just don't do these. Okay. Or you will be in a lot of like turbulent waves and stuff. So talked about those good faith, the DB rules and stuff. These are still required. Also, please, please, please note, when you do get to that point of contracting with a selected contractor, right? And remember, use the word contractor and not consultant in your RFPs, okay? In 2 CFR 200 and EPA's guidance, procurement guidance, they talk about the difference between a consultant and a contractor, right? So there are hourly rate caps. There are daily rate caps for consultants. That's why you want to make sure that you just say contractor. Okay. All right. This language at the bottom, the contractor shall not discriminate. This language per 40 CFR 33 must be included in your contracts. Okay. All right. That's not something to be negotiated, okay? And also don't forget your cost price, right? I've talked about this. Do not forget to do a cost price analysis prior to going out for any solicitation, okay? That's in Appendix A of the EPA procurement guide. These are the 6 faith good efforts. They should look familiar. Okay. And in here, right in here, guys, B for a minimum of 30 calendar days. This is also the recommended time frame that EPA says in their procurement guidance, but it lives here in the DBE requirement. So if you want to go out for 7 or 3 weeks, that's going to be a problem. Okay. Also, you want to go out for 30 days because if you think about procurement, right? You send it out, give it a week. Okay. Everybody's digesting it out there, right? And now you open it up for questions for a week, 10 days. Then you close it for questions, right? You do not want to leave questions to be open for the entire time frame of the RFP. Why? Well, number one, you're going to get bombarded with a lot of questions, but also think about the logistics of that. If you keep it open through the entire time period, and let's say you get a proposal from a firm, and there's 3 days left on the solicitation, right? It's still open, and you get a question. Okay. Now you have to answer that question and you have to publish the response to everyone. But someone has already provided their bid. And now that answer could change their response. Okay. So you can already see already what's going to happen, right? The conundrum. So let's just not get into that. You issue the addenda saying, hey, we're gonna respond to all questions. We're gonna aggregate all of them. We're gonna put it up on our website or wherever you put the RFP, in the first place. And then questions are no longer allowed. And then it closes and it's clean. Okay. You want a clean, audit-proof RFP process or RFQ process too. All right, procurement. Okay. So remember, separate rules for tribal nations. They are allowed to solicit and recruit Indian organizations, okay? 33,304. All right. Here's EPA's DBE rule, okay? There's the 30 days, and you need to document your efforts, okay? That has not changed. So just be aware of that. This is one that gets overlooked again and again and again. That and Davis-Bacon, but we will not get into Davis-Bacon. Cost price reasonableness. Again, these are reminders and considerations. Again, it always must be considered for RFPs and RFQs. EPA recommends at least 25%. Okay. Evaluation must be weighted. And if you do a percentage, remember that companion piece I was talking about, the 4-page one? They do an amazing, and I mean amazing, evaluation, sample evaluation. I use this all the time, guys. It's I want to say idiot proof, but it's already gone through EPA legal. It's been published by EPA legal saying demonstrated experience with contaminated properties, demonstrated experience with time management and project deliveries, right? Time, what is, the qualifications of the team, references. It's all laid out there with, and you put the percentages, the cost price reasonableness is there, and it's at 25. So whatever other percentages you want to weight, I am not a fan of the weighted system of 1 through 4 and 4 being very good. There's still subjectivity in there and it gets very complicated. I am a fan of the percentage weight that is in the companion piece that EPA published. They do have the other one too. You can look at that. So remember, evaluate at the same time as other factors, for all bidders. You don't necessarily have to do this, okay? It's just the way I like to do a blind evaluation, like my evaluation team. They all do their own evaluations and then blindly, and then we come together, right? Okay. But you can evaluate only for the top two scoring bids, but there you go. Okay. So here are your checklists, right? Before you procure, right? Confirm your current thresholds, right? It's fluid. It's fluid. Check your DB status, review the geographic preference policy, identify if subrecipients are involved in um, your grant. Are you working with an organization that you currently have a subaward with, or if you have an RLF program, have you been, are you doing subawards? You should be doing subawards. Making sure that your policies and procedures align. During procurement, document, right? Independent cost estimates, competition requirements based on threshold, right? Don't do unnecessary work, guys. If you have an FY25 brownfield grant, right? You just got awarded it, and you're going into procurement now, make sure, right, that what you're procuring for, those thresholds, right, have all shifted. So just make sure if you're looking for, maybe you're looking for a firm to do your community engagement, right? $75,000 contract. That's what you're thinking of. That's what's in your approved work plan. So you look at that, and if your internal policies and procedures say that you can, you're following 2 CFR 200 and the procurement, 318 through 327, right? Okay. Is allowing you to do small purchase, then you just have to get them from, lists, and I can call up people, I can email people, I can say, hey, who did you guys use or whatever. But, coming up with at least 3, documenting your search and how you came up with, list. And you can just approach and say, hey, are you interested in bidding on this? Right? There's no need to do a full-blown competitive procurement process unless your own internal procedures tell you that you must do that regardless of the threshold. Okay? All right. After the award, monitor. You have to monitor contracts. Ensure that activities are covered right in the work plan. Make sure, please, even that's the award of the, solicitation of the procurement solicitation. You're going to monitor the contracts. You're going to ensure that all the activities are in the work plan. If they are not, please, no no shifting of budgets without talking to your EPA project officer, right? It has to be in the work plan. It has to be approved by EPA. Okay, some things aren't now with participants work costs, but I'm not going to get into that with this webinar. Please just read the updates into CFR 200 because it does get into that. Keep your files audit ready. Just think if I came and visited you. Okay, all right. So we talked about the cost of not following compliance, the procurement rules and why it's so important and stuff. I didn't make up these. Okay, they come right from 208. Okay, specific conditions that may include withholding authority, requiring payments as reimbursements, requiring additional project monitoring, right? Additional non-compliance remedies, temporarily withholding payments, disallow costs, suspend or terminate the award, or withhold further federal awards, or pursue other legally available remedies, which means anything in the kitchen sink, right? So, guys, the cost of non-compliance and not following these rules is pretty significant. So just don't do it. Okay? So the takeaways. Read your EPA procurement guidance documents. Watch the procurement day 1 and day 2. I think in total, it'll be 2 hours and 15 minutes. Okay. I try to inject humor in these things as much as possible so that it's not too dry, without getting in trouble, right? So know what you need and want out of your RFP before you even begin writing and thinking about this, right? Um, Please be very, very, very careful with RFPs that you find on the internet, okay? You have no idea if someone hired somebody to write that and they're not a bidder, so they could do it. And maybe they are an environmental firm, but they just are choosing not to bid on the work. You just never know. It's best to call, work with CCLR, call, if you do find an RFP that you really, really like, call them and see, like, just get information about it. There's the link for all of the updates, so you can, peruse them all at your leisure when you can't sleep at night. But the last thing is just don't wing it. There are so many resources out there. Besides CCLR, your tab providers, email CCLR, email us, email me, keep in touch with us. And, you know, there's plenty of people out there that can help you. And honestly, once you do it the first time, the other times will be a lot easier and less painful. Right, Devin?
Absolutely.
Well, we have 14 minutes. There you go. Rapid fire, not even in 60 minutes. We did this in, almost 45. Not even. We did it in 40 because we started a little later.
Yeah, awesome. Way to go. Thank you so much, Joelle. Um, so we do have a few questions in the chat that we can go through now. So from a bit earlier in the webinar, Kathy asked, Joelle, any advice on Executive Order 14398 and DEI?
No, honestly. Um, I will say this, don't poke the bear, right? I think, Devin, when we were reviewing grants, grant applications this year, when we saw what will we say? Volatile words that, or could be words that might be in conflict with that executive order. Um, we just chose a different word. So if there's a specific question, Kathy, please reach out to me. We'll chat. We'll have one of our chats.
Absolutely. Another question from Casey. What if your subrecipient is a tribe with their own policies and procedures in place? Would they still be required to follow 2 CFR 200 procurement standards?
Okay, great question, fabulous question. It depends on when you entered into the subrecipient award with them. And if the funding, like, it's all about the timing of the funding. So if you just entered into and your funding is from 10/1/2025, your award, um, without knowing key specifics, I would say talk to your project officer about that sub recipient agreement. The other thing is that the tribal came in place with, they could use their own back in 2024. So October of 2024 was that rule. And so if it's before then, I would think that they could. You just need to document, but that's definitely a question I would talk to your project officer about.
And then we also have a few similar questions regarding, avoiding restricting competition in RFQs and RFPs. So some folks asked, can you ask for experience in preparing COPs? And can we say that applicants should highlight their experience with any specific type of work? So yeah, basically, um,
Yeah.
can you ask for a description of experience?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any problem. I've seen plenty of, I don't think there's, and if Jim Drummond is on the line, feel free to chime in. Um, so I don't think there's any problem. Like, here's the thing. An RFP is a calling card, right? It's almost like a job interview, honestly. You're trying to find your partner with and I always recommend saying it's a solicitation for professional services, right? Because in typical work plans for brownfield grants, you have project management help with reporting, if you need technical reports or something, and you need the QEP's assistance with that, right? Reporting does not require a QEP, right? A qualified environmental professional. Community engagement does not require a QEP. Reuse planning does not require a QEP. Now, site assessments, right? Site characterization, absolutely, you need a QEP. So this is why I say you're looking for professional services if you want somebody to help you with all of those, deliverables, all those activities. So you're looking for professional services. And then in particular, when you start talking about a qualified environmental professional, right? You're saying, hey, these activities include, doing quality assurance QA/QC documents that are going to be required, such as QAPs, HASPs, SAPs, right? So, your hazardous and safety plans, your your site specific sampling plan, that stuff. Anyway, all those documents, yeah. So, but going back to the whole job interview thing, right? You can basically say, hey, look, we have this grant and we need help with implementing the deliverables under it. And those deliverables will include the following, the following outputs and outcomes, right? But the following outputs will include, project management and reporting, you know, uh, and site assessments that include the following, right? As well as reuse planning, right? So it's like a general thing. If I put in every single thing from the work plan, which be careful with that, um, then basically you're leading the witness, right? I want to make sure that I put enough in there that people can respond, but then also provide me with what makes their firm so unique that I want to be like, yeah, I want to interview them. Or they sound like they know exactly what they're doing. Like they've done this before. It's not their first rodeo. Or if it is a new firm, they know how to treat, deal with contaminated sites, right? So it's having a little bit of mystery and making them do their homework too. Check out my website. See, make sure you know the values and the missions and, of our organization and what we're trying to do. By that time, hopefully, you have put together, a great little web page or something, that says, hey, we were awarded a brownfield grant and now we're going to be doing a solicitation soon, but this is what we hope to do with this program. So it's more comprehensive than just thinking about restrictive language, if you will. It's holistic.
Let's see. Hope asked, so for local governments, in the past, the rule has been if local procurement policies are more strict than federal policies, you must follow the local procurement requirements. Is that still true?
Yeah, sure. However, okay. Um, if the restrictions say, here's a great example, okay, right? So if your government says or local organization says, um, you can go out for a competitive bid for 3 weeks, okay? The problem is with that is now the federal government, you just kind of cut off that DBE of 30 days. And so that's a no-no, right? But if your government goes the other way and says you need to be out for 5 weeks, or 7 weeks or 6 weeks. I know I worked for a county government and we actually had to, if you went out, right, for at least a minimum of 30 days and you only got one bid, it had to go out again. No questions asked. It went out again for another 2 weeks. Okay. If you still didn't, if after that you still only had one bid, then you had to do the documentation stuff, okay, of why you were accepting, that one bid. And oftentimes we didn't, we just uh kind of did a blameless autopsy of why we only got one bid and to just send it out again in a different language or something. So, does that answer the question? It has to be more restrictive than the federal government. Okay, sure. Good question though, Hope. Oh, you're on mute, Devin.
Thank you.
I never say that to you, Devin. You are always on it. So I'm
I know
like,
that never
I
happens
finally
to
got
me.
her. She finally did it.
One last question. So Rolanda asks, can CCLR assist with draft RLF subaward review? Yeah, that is something that we can help with. We can definitely provide technical assistance around RLFs and review subawards. Although our technical assistance is kind of restricted to regions 9 and 10, so we're the EPA regions 9 and 10 technical assistance to brownfields provider. So if you're outside Region 9 and 10, you can connect with your tab provider, or you can connect with your tab provider. And also Grow America is a new technical assistance provider specifically for RLFs, and everything having to do with RLFs, and that is a national technical assistance provider. So you can absolutely also work with Grow America for any questions around RLFs.
On that matter, if anybody has any questions, honestly, we're here to please. So please, uh, it's just, I mean, we work, Devin and the CCLR comms team, they work really closely with the other tab providers. We know everyone. So if you just want to email us and be like, hey, blah, 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 we'll do an introduction for you to the tab provider that might be, in your neck of the woods, and then um, just give you a little connection there so that you're not going in cold. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. So it is 1:58. I really thanks for being interested in this, and please, um, you know, I've gotten it is done with just like our grant reviews. All the comments that we provide and that I provide on RFP feedbacks, like when I review them, are made with the best and good intentions so that you are audit proof. So that, are they perfect? Um, no, they're not perfect, but this is supposed to be a collaborative way with us and EPA, and making sure that you get your eHarmony match with your contractors that you need. Okay?